Hello there, bitch. I'm going to tell you in detail why you have been kidnapped, what's going to happen to you. You're going to be drugged up real heavy with a combination of sodium pentothal and phenobarbital. You're not going to remember a fucking thing about this little adventure or what has happened to you.
Welcome back to my channel. Brace yourselves for this one. This video contains details which some viewers, probably many viewers, may find disturbing. Cynthia Hendy was the girlfriend and accomplice of David Parker Ray, also known as the Toy Box Killer. Ray was an American kidnapper, torturer, rapist, and suspected serial killer. Though no bodies were found, Ray was accused by his accomplices of killing several women and was suspected by the police to have murdered as many as 60 women from Arizona and New Mexico while living in Elephant Butte, approximately 7 miles north of Truth or Consequences in New Mexico. He would kidnap between 5 and 6 women a year, holding each of them captive for around 3 to 4 months. During this period, he would sexually abuse his victims, sometimes involving his dog or his girlfriend, who participated willingly in Ray's crimes. And this is our subject of today. And often torture them with surgical instruments. Then Ray would drug them with barbiturates in an attempt to erase their memories of what had happened before abandoning them by the side of the road once he was done with them. Ray was convicted of kidnapping and torture in 2001, for which he received a lengthy sentence, but he was never convicted of murder. Although my channel is mainly about female killers, I simply can't do this video without going into detail about one of the worst male predators ever, as my subject in this video was his accomplice for about 3 years. Between the 1950s and March 22nd, 1999, David Parker Ray sexually tortured and presumably killed his victims using all kinds of devices and objects. Ray was born on November 6, 1939 in Belen, New Mexico. Abandoned by his mother and father at the age of 10, he was raised by his grandfather, though his father maintained an abusive relationship with him and even exposed him to pornography. He had a younger sister, but they were split up when their grandmother died. In school, Ray did poorly and was teased for being unusually shy around girls. As a teenager, he abused alcohol and drugs. When he was an adult, he served in the US Army and later became a mechanic. He worked as a mechanic and park ranger for nearby Elephant Butte State Park. He also married 4 times, each of them ending in divorce. He had 2 daughters, one of whom also became an accomplice to his sick fantasies. At some point, he started abducting, raping and torturing women, presumably killing them as well. Exactly how many victims he claimed over the years is uncertain, though he may have started as early as 1950 when he was still a kid. Born Cynthia Lee Hendy on February the 6th, 1960, in Seattle's University District, the future kidnapper and sexual criminal had a troubled childhood. Raised in an impoverished neighborhood on the outskirts of Everett, Washington, Hendy grew up with an alcoholic mother, a bartender who would routinely let her daughter go hungry. She would never give the kids a dime, a childhood friend recalled. All of us were hungry. We'd be lucky to get a can of tuna fish out of her. We'd go over after school, and Cindy would have to beg like hell till her mother threw out a can of tuna fish just to get rid of us. Cindy's father was in the US Navy and was frequently away from home at sea. Her mother, an aspiring model and local Seattle beauty queen, regularly entered pageants around the Seattle area. Precocious and headstrong, Cindy had little interest in school and was always near the bottom of her class, often playing hooky with her friends. By her early teens, she had developed a fondness for drugs and alcohol, disappearing for days at a time as she partied with her friends all over Seattle. As a child, Hendy saw her mother get beaten by an abusive boyfriend named Dick. Appropriate. Hendy's mother eventually married another man when her daughter was 8. Hendy was around 11 when he crawled into her bed and attempted to rape her. He convinced his wife he drunkenly mistook one bed for another. Hendy's mother took her new husband's side, and the two kicked Cindy out of the house around age 12. Left on her own, Hendy dated drug dealers, prostituted herself, and became dependent on alcohol and cocaine. She enjoyed aggressive, near-violent sex that included rape fantasies. One partner recalled she once said they should, quote, rape somebody, maybe a prostitute, unquote. When her youngest child turned 10, Hendy gave up on raising them and sent them off to their grandparents. After dropping out of school in the 8th grade, Cindy became pregnant at 16, giving birth to a son named Shane. But after his father left, Shane would mostly be brought up by his grandmother and assorted foster parents. In the years to come, Cindy would have 2 more children, Heather and Muffy, both by different fathers. Cindy's dysfunctional childhood had done little to prepare her for adult relationships. She was immature and always turned to drink and drugs to avoid reality. But even more dangerous was her attraction to a long line of abusive men who would often beat her up. Court papers show that one of her reported 3 former husbands was a convict who later served jail time for assaulting her. Another ex-boyfriend pushed cocaine. In the late 1980s, Cindy was briefly married to Robert Hendy, even having his initials tattooed between her thumb and forefinger to go with a formation of shooting stars on her left breast. And in 1992, another husband was sentenced to more than 2 years jail time for choking and threatening to kill her. She made some real poor choices in men, said her Washington attorney, Harvey Chamberlain, who defended Cindy during her numerous court appearances over the years. She struck me as a person who was prone to be victimized by violence. Friends remember Cindy as having a Jekyll and Hyde personality. When she was sober, she was a kind, considerate woman who loved reading romance novels and watching her favorite television soap operas. But once she started drinking and drugging, she became obnoxious, foul-mouthed, and so aggressive that she would pick fights with strangers in bars. Her first arrest came in 1979 for forgery and possession of stolen property. Soon, she had racked up a string of felony convictions involving alcohol, drugs, and theft. Later, she would boast of her criminal career, which included 5 court appearances for incidents involving domestic violence with various husbands and boyfriends. In 1990, she was charged with a felony, receiving 14 days in jail and a year's probation. 3 years later, Cindy was arrested for trying to sell cocaine to an undercover sheriff's deputy in Monroe, Washington, and after admitting to a lesser charge of cocaine possession, was jailed for 30 days. Her son Shane Larson would later tell the Seattle Post-Intelligencer how his mother's life had been ruined by abusive men, alcohol, and drugs. Talking about his own tragic childhood, he explained how he and his 2 sisters only saw their mother on and off, as they had lived in so many different homes. Most of her boyfriends liked to drink a lot, pick fights, punch her and beat her up, said Shane, who, from the age of 13, was constantly in trouble with the police. According to Shane, some of Cindy's boyfriends would get high and beat him on occasion. She'd always try to make sure we didn't get hurt, he said. We've seen that our whole life growing up. And although his mother hid her heavy drinking and drug taking from the children, as the oldest, I knew what was going on, Larson said. He often begged his mother to leave her abusive boyfriends when they treated her badly, but she'd refuse, saying that they paid the bills and she didn't like to be alone. By the early 1990s, Cindy was officially classified as mentally disabled and began living off her Social Security payments. She had now moved in with a 39-year-old construction worker in what was to prove a particularly stormy relationship. On at least 2 occasions, she filed domestic abuse charges against him, resulting in several court appearances. On July 4th, 1995, the couple was arrested in Kirkland, Washington, for stealing $3,300 worth of aluminium pipes from a Department of Transportation storage shed, and Cindy was sent back to jail. On her booking slip, she was described as a 5-foot, 4-inch blue-eyed blonde weighing just 100 pounds. Upon her release, she found it impossible to abstain from cocaine, consistently failing court-ordered random drug tests and being sent back to prison again and again. In 1996, Cindy fell for a rough-and-ready biker named John Edward Youngblood. A giant of a man, standing almost 7 feet tall, Youngblood, who always wore the same battered leather jacket, often beat her mercilessly. A few weeks after they moved in together in Everett, Washington, Hendy swore out a police complaint accusing Youngblood of assaulting her and then kicking her out in the street. She spent the night in a pickup truck wearing only her pajamas. But Hendy soon returned to Youngblood and the couple continued their turbulent relationship. In the summer of 1997, now 37 years old, Cynthia Hendy was partying even harder than usual and faced hard jail time for refusing to undergo a court-ordered drug counselling course. Desperate to remain free, she went on the run, heading east to Truth or Consequences, just days before Marie Parker was murdered in the toy box. John Youngblood, whose father lived in TOC, had told her to go there and hide out. He promised to join her as soon as she found a place to live. On arriving in Truth or Consequences, Cynthia Hendy put on her best suit and went straight to the social services department asking for help. The staff was impressed by the smartly dressed, well-groomed 30-something woman, telephoning the Marina Suites motel in Elephant Butte, which provided temporary accommodation, to see if there was a vacancy. Social services said they had a lady who was new to the area and asked if she could stay at the motel, said its English-born manager, Jean Clark. We said yes. That afternoon, Clark personally helped Hendy move her meagre belongings into her 2-room suite and mini kitchen at the marina, which bills itself as a home away from home. She was impressed with the attractive young woman and took her under her wing. She was a very smart young lady, remembered Clark. Makeup, nice clothes, hair always immaculate. She didn't know many people, and she'd come here for a new start to get away from past drug use, etc. No, she had come there to escape imprisonment for drug use. She was on the run. There's a big difference. As Clark, who was in her late 40s, had experience counselling HIV patients who were also drug addicts, she sympathised with Hendy, deciding to help her straighten up her life. It was just like a support thing, said Jean, who had herself arrived in Elephant Butte only 2 months earlier. I was new to the area and I didn't know any other girls in town, but I'm also one of those people who always help somebody that's down on their luck. About 2 weeks after Hendy arrived, she was joined by John Youngblood. They had to leave Marina Suites as social services would not accommodate a couple. So Hendy and Youngblood moved into a small bubble tent by the lake at Elephant Butte with a new kitten that Cindy had been given. On August 2nd, 1997, Jean married her boyfriend, John Branow, and Hendy and Youngblood were witnesses. Over the next few weeks, the couples frequently socialized together, but Jean began to notice a change in her friend, who seemed to be under Youngblood's control. She went back to alcohol pretty badly, said Jean. She would get any pills or any drugs she could. I knew she used to do the crank or coke. When she was in a real distressed state, she would never admit to me that she was back into it, but I strongly suspected. That September, Hendy filed a domestic abuse complaint against Youngblood. She later withdrew it, admitting that she had deliberately smashed a teapot over her head and told police he had done it. Jean Branow, who lived within hearing range of the tent, was often kept awake at night. They had some really bad fights, she said. It was pretty volatile. We'd often hear a lot of arguing, shouting and banging coming from the tent. It seemed that once that relationship flared up, everything went from bad to worse. Soon afterward, police were called to the tent by neighbours to break up a fight between John and Cindy. Then Youngblood left town, moving to Arizona, where he was soon living with a new girlfriend. Now on her own, Cynthia Hendy began frequenting the local bar scene, quickly establishing a reputation for herself as a hardcore partier, extreme even by TRC standards. She openly boasted of being an ex-con, delighting in comparing her criminal record with strangers in bars. Wanting to be closer to the action, Cindy moved out of the tent and into a battered old trailer which had no electricity or hot water at 1603 Corzine Street off Morgan Street, TRC, and dived headfirst into the town's party scene. "We called her Six-Pack Cindy," said one of her friends, George Padilla. She would go with any guy in a heartbeat if he'd buy her a drink or give her some crank. During early 1998, Padilla got to know Cindy well as they regularly hung out together with the town's fast crowd. "I heard she'd been in jail," he said. "She was always on drugs and she had a crazy thing about cigarettes. She chain smoked and always had to have one, otherwise she'd go wacko." Hendy was rumoured to support herself by trading sexual favours with local businessmen for money. One prominent store owner even took her on a gambling weekend to Las Vegas, but threw her out of their hotel room half naked after she got drunk and lost control. She later complained that he had given her a sexually transmitted disease and threatened legal action. She once told me that she didn't ever have to worry about getting arrested, as she had something on most of the police and business people in this town, remembered Jean Branow. "I never took it seriously at the time, but now I wonder." Branow could only watch helplessly as she saw her friend spiral out of control into an abyss of alcohol, sex, and drugs. "She was on the downhill road," said Jean. "It got to the point where I didn't want to give her $5 or $10 or gas money because I knew what she was doing with it." As Branow got to know her better, she realized that Cindy had serious mental problems. "It came out with the strange sexual behavior," she said, "the S&M and nymphomania. She had told me about her sexual abuse as a child by family members and what a tough childhood she'd had. And Jean even began to suspect that Cindy was having an affair with her husband, John Branow. One night she was partying in a trailer south of Broadway here on the main drag," said Jean. "My husband never came home that night. I had to pick him up at 9:30 a.m. the next morning because he'd stayed all night with her. But at the time, she never confronted Cindy about her suspicions, and the two remained friends." Hendy met David Parker Ray in 1997 at State Park, where they both worked. The two quickly bonded over their shared violent sexual fantasies and S&M. Though Ray was 20 years her senior, 37-year-old Hendy began living with him soon after she moved to New Mexico.
All the women that he had murdered, he said at least one a year for about 40 years.
What then was your reaction?
Made me nervous.
Why nervous?
Well, wouldn't it make you nervous? I mean, that's natural. he'd be nervous too. But it also interested me because I felt I was getting to know a serial killer. I'd never met one, and I was just curious. I wasn't sure if I believed him or not. I was interested in getting into his mind, I guess. When I saw the toy box, I thought it was just a storage trailer, because that's what he had said it was.
Hendy would later state that Ray had bragged that he knew how to kill someone and bury them in a lake. They seemed to feed off of each other, and Cindy got an opportunity to let go of all her inhibitions, said reporter Yvette Martinez. Soon, Hendy found herself routinely helping Ray pick targets to fulfill his depraved sexual desires, starting with an acquaintance. So why was David Parker Ray also called the Toy Box Killer? Well, he spent $100,000 on a trailer, soundproofing it and fitting it with sex toys and torture devices. Okay, warning here, this is where I also start getting a little bit more graphic, okay? Because what this guy did was off the charts. He nicknamed this trailer the Toy Box. On one of the walls of his trailer, he had also written in bold letters, Satan's Den. The trailer, which one officer described as a demented toy box, was full of sinister sexual devices and sadomasochistic equipment, some of which had been handcrafted by Ray himself, with clearly one purpose in mind: torture and pain. One disturbing item was the centerpiece of the toy box, the first thing you see when you walk in. A modified gynecological chair with electrodes to administer electric shocks, which was used to strap the victim in. A mirror had been mounted on the ceiling directly above the chair so that his victims could see themselves be raped and tortured. There were modified drills with sexual devices attached to them. Diagrams all over the walls illustrating ways of inflicting pain. Wooden contraptions that bent the victims over and immobilized them while Ray had his dogs and sometimes other friends rape them. He has been said to have wanted his victims to see everything he was doing to them. There were boxes full of surgical instruments, syringes, chains, pulleys, straps, clamps, shock machines, saws, leg spreader bars, ankle spreader bars, all labelled by Ray to indicate the measurement of spread. Dildos made from plastic with nails soldered into it that would rip the victim's thighs to shreds. Ray and his accomplices targeted sex workers, luring them with some kind of ruse, such as soliciting them or pretending to be a police officer. He would then take them to this homemade torture chamber, the toy box, where they would wake up already strapped into the chair. Delirious, restrained, and immobilized, they would be forced to listen to an audio tape recording that Ray had prepared. On this recording, Ray would tell his victim what had happened to them, what he was going to do with them, and for how long.
Hello there, bitch. Are you comfortable right now? I doubt it. Wrists and ankles chained, gagged, probably blindfolded. You are disoriented and scared too, I would imagine. Perfectly normal under the circumstances. For a little while, at least, you need to get your shit together and listen to this tape. It is very relevant to your situation. I'm going to tell you, in detail, why you have been kidnapped, what's going to happen to you, and how long you'll be here. I don't know the details of your capture because this tape is being created July 23rd, 1993 as a general advisory tape for future female captives. The information I'm going to give you is based on my experience dealing with captives over a period of several years. If, at a future date, there are any major changes in our procedures, the tape will be upgraded. Now, you are obviously here against your will. Totally helpless. Don't know where you're at. Don't know what's going to happen to you. You're very scared or very pissed off. I'm sure that you've already tried to get your wrists and ankles loose. No, you can't. Now you're just waiting to see what's gonna happen next. You probably think you're gonna be raped, and you're fucking sure right about that.
Yeah, the rest of it basically said what was going to happen to you, like how he was going to torture you. Talked about the toy box.
On another recording, Ray told his victims, "We both know what you've been brought here for. I'm going to use you for a sex slave, and it's going to be painful as hell. That's the way I want it to be." Ray would record the torture either by audio or with a video camera that he had set up in the trailer, and take trophies such as clothing and jewelry. At least some of the victims were let go after a few days. Ray claimed to have drugged them to make them forget about what happened. According to Cynthia Hendy, the fatal victims were dismembered and buried, dumped in the Elephant Butte Lake, or dumped in ravines. It is thought that he terrorized many women with these tools for many years with the help of accomplices, some of whom are alleged to have been several of the women he was dating. The couple's first victim was Angela, whom Hendy admits knowing beforehand.
I was leaving for Washington. He was being a big baby, didn't want to be alone, and talked me into helping him get a woman for him while I was gone. I felt for Angela because her and I were friends. We had partied a few times.
Hendy also said that most of their time with the victims, Ray would torture them more while she would stand by and watch him. Hendy recalled she had no remorse at that time and no feelings of any sort. She described her state as slow motion.
I had no remorse at the time. It was like slow motion. I was there, but I don't think I had any feeling one way or the other.
Yes, I'm calling for a young lady that ran into the house and says she's just been raped. She's got her chain on her and everything. She's someone right away. This lady's naked and everything else. She said they've been holding her for 3 days.
On March the 22nd, 1999, 911 dispatchers received a series of calls reporting a woman frantically trying to stop cars on a street for help in Elephant Butte, New Mexico. The woman, Cynthia Hendy, was naked except for a metal dog collar attached to a 6-foot chain. She had been kidnapped 3 days earlier by Ray. Cynthia Hendy had served as an accomplice. Describing her harrowing ordeal, Hendy, who had been a sex worker from Albuquerque, explained that she had gone to Ray's RV for a date. Once the door was shut, he took out a badge and said he was an undercover police officer. He told me I was under arrest and put a handcuff on my wrist, said Hendy. I knew something was wrong. Hendy was then tasered, drugged, blindfolded and chained to a bed. She heard the click of a tape recorder and then Ray's instruction tape played. Unmentionable things were done to her, John Glatt, author of Cries in the Desert, said. Hendy passed out from the pain, but managed to later escape after Hendy had accidentally left a keyring on a nightstand. Hendy noticed Hendy's attempt to escape and a fight ensued. During the struggle, Hendy broke a lamp on the survivor's head, but Hendy unlocked her chains and stabbed Hendy in the neck with an ice pick. Hendy fled while wearing only an iron slave collar and padlocked chains. She ran down the road seeking help, which she got from a nearby homeowner who took her in, comforted her, and called the police. Her escape led officials to the trailer and instigated the capture of Ray and his accomplices. Police detained Ray and Hendy. Hendy later claimed that she had only whipped Hendy while Ray did the rest. According to Hendy, Ray was the mastermind behind their depraved spree. Her role consisted of helping him track down victims, watching as he brutalized them, and occasionally helping him torment them. When Ray's property was searched, investigators discovered more than equipment. They found evidence as well.
First thing my eyes focused on was this black chair, which turned out to be a gynecology chair, just sitting there empty. He could get a woman in virtually any position. She was his sex slave. Everything in here denoted pain. Everything in here denoted destruction.
This was a torture chamber. I've never had any question that David Parker Ray is a serial killer.
There were videotapes that he took of the victims, said FBI agent Frank Fisher. There were audio tapes that he would play to his victims, telling them what he was going to do to them. Ray's tape instructed Hendy to address Ray as master and Hendy as mistress, and to only speak when spoken to. Fisher said authorities later found Ray's journal with, quote, meticulous records detailing the victims that he abducted and what he did to them, unquote. The way he talked, I didn't feel like this was his first time, said Hendy. It was like he knew what he was doing. He told me I was never going to see my family again. He told me he would kill me like the others. In the face of certain death, Hendy saw her opening on March the 22nd, 1999. Hendy had left the keys to Hendy's restraints on a nearby table while she left the room. Hendy released herself, stabbed Hendy in the neck with an ice pick, and bolted out of the trailer. Authorities saved Hendy and arrested Ray and Hendy immediately. When a reporter asked Hendy if she was in any way involved, she replied, "No, kind of." Fisher also said a key piece of evidence recovered was David Parker Ray's journal. The journal contained dozens of entries. There were no names, only dates and the number of times he tortured each victim. In total, investigators collected more than 1,000 pieces of evidence, according to the New York Times. After their arrest, Ray and Hendy initially claimed Vigil was a heroin addict that they were trying to detox. Authorities quickly saw through the story after searching the trailer. They found the audio tape which backed up Vigil's claims and a slew of torture instruments ranging from pulleys, whips, and sexual devices inside the toy box. Police also found footage of them torturing another woman, leading them to suspect that more than one crime had occurred. A full month before Vigil's abduction, Angelica Montano had been dumped by the side of the road after 3 days of torture. Montano alerted police to the couple's crimes against her, but authorities never investigated her claims until after Vigil's escape. She was picked up by an off-duty law enforcement officer and told him what happened, but he did not believe her and left her at a bus stop. She also later called police about the incident, but there had been no follow-up. Not 2 months after Ray and Hendy's arrests, Montano died of heart failure brought on by pneumonia at the age of 28. Police identified another victim, Kelly Garrett, also called Kelly Van Cleve, from a videotape which dated from 1996. Garrett was found alive in Colorado after police identified her from a tattoo on her ankle. She testified that she had gotten into a fight with her husband and decided to spend the night playing pool with friends. Ray's daughter, Jessie, who knew Garrett, took her to Blue Water Saloon in Truth or Consequences, New Mexico, and may have drugged the beer she was drinking. She offered Garrett a ride home, but instead took Garrett to her father's house. Garrett said that she endured 2 days of torture before Ray drove her back to her home. Ray told her husband that he had found the woman incoherent on a beach. Her husband didn't believe that she could not remember where she'd been, and Garrett said she did not know what to tell police, so did not contact them. Her husband sued for divorce, and Garrett moved to Colorado. She was later interviewed on Cold Case Files about her ordeal. When no additional victims came forward, investigators came to believe Ray may have killed the rest. But to this day, there is no evidence to prove a single murder. No matter how many places they checked, they were never able to find any bodies. Regardless, with the 3 women who had come forward, there was enough evidence to convict the couple on more than 25 counts of kidnapping and rape. The FBI sent 100 agents to examine Ray's property and surroundings, but no identifiable human remains were found. To prevent women from reporting the assaults, Ray drugged them in an attempt to induce amnesia. He made a tape recording of himself telling one woman that the drugs were sodium pentothal and phenobarbital. These drugs are known for numbing pain and inducing amnesia. While awaiting trial, Ray spoke to FBI profilers and said he was fascinated by the kidnapping of Colleen Stan and other sexually motivated kidnappings. The FBI had spoken to Ray as early as 1989 in connection with his business manufacturing and selling bondage-related sexual devices. Other possible victims include Jesse Ray's former girlfriend, Jill Troyer, who disappeared in 1995, and Billy Ray Bowers, who was found shot to death and floating in Elephant Butte Lake in 1989. Now in custody, the repercussions of her actions hit Hendy like a ton of bricks. Facing 197 years in prison if convicted of 25 felony counts of kidnapping and criminal sexual penetration, she turned on Ray and agreed to a plea deal on April 6, 1999. Her cooperation revealed even more of the couple's sadistic methods. Forcing victims to look at themselves being mutilated and shoving them into a wooden contraption so dogs and acquaintances could rape them. Hendy also revealed that Ray previously had another accomplice. David confided in her that he had a friend by the name of Roy Yancey who he forced to kill a woman, said Martinez. He strangled her and then buried her body out in the desert. In return for testimony against Ray and Yancey, Hendy still faced a maximum of 54 years and a minimum of 12. She told investigators about 14 murders Ray committed and pointed out some of the potential burial sites. She knew of at least 14 girls that he'd murdered. David had told her of a body that he had disposed of in the lake and that he had learned from that when you put a body into the lake, even if you weight the body down, you have to eviscerate the body cavity so that the air does not bring the body back up to the surface. But a search of the lake in Elephant Butte failed to turn up any bodies. The lake is 23 miles long and about 3 or 4 miles wide, with a depth of 90 to 100 feet in parts. Breaking down under questioning, Roy Yancey said he was ordered by David Parker Ray to kill a woman by the name of Marie Parker and then to dispose of her body.
From what I understand is that he's had many years of kidnapping, torturing, and killing women.
How did you come up with the idea to kill Marie?
It was David Ray Parker's idea.
Yancey said Ray had given him no choice and had held a gun to his head. But even with Roy Yancey's help, investigators couldn't find a body. It's believed that Ray moved Parker's body after Yancey had initially buried her. A judge ruled that the cases for crimes against Cynthia Vigil, Angelica Montano, and Kelly Garrett would be tried separately. Prosecutors said that this damaged their case, as each woman's story would otherwise have corroborated the others. The judge also ruled much of the evidence found in the trailer during the 1999 raid could not be admitted in the Garrett or Montano cases. District Judge Neil Mertz said the evidence was sufficient to show Ray may have committed the crimes outlined in the 25-count indictment against him. The charges included kidnapping, aggravated battery, and sexual assault. District Attorney Ron Lopez said he was pleased with the outcome of the 2-day preliminary hearing, but is sure there are other victims who have not yet been identified. I don't think he was after somebody who was willing. He likes to see the pain and the torture, Lopez said. Ray's attorney, Jeff Ryan, had argued that some of the charges should be dismissed since his client did not hold the gun used to threaten the women and the victims' injuries were not sufficient to prove great bodily harm. Yes, that's because the damage Ray afflicted was mostly done internally, you idiot. The introductory tape message that Ray played to his victims was also not allowed to be presented in Cynthia Vigil's trial because she could not remember if he had played it. Therefore, it was irrelevant to the case. Cynthia Vigil screamed at Ray and wept on the witness stand as she described how she broke free after 3 days of being held against her will. The 22-year-old said she fought back with an ice pick and fled Ray's lakeside mobile home naked with a padlocked metal collar and chain on her neck. I ran and ran and ran, she said. It seemed like I ran forever. I seen some door open in some trailer. Some lady was in some trailer. I just grabbed her and told her to help me. Ray also is accused of abducting and torturing another woman a month earlier. She also testified against him at the pre-trial hearing. Hendy waived a preliminary hearing and the charges against her were reduced from 25 counts to 5. Under a plea bargain, Hendy is to plead guilty to the 5 charges, testify against Ray, and serve a sentence of at least 12 years in prison, but not more than 54. The first trial for crimes against Kelly Garrett began on March 28, 2000. Just after the jury selection was done, Ray suffered a heart attack and the trial was postponed. Additional obstacles were encountered by prosecutors when both Roy Yancey and Cynthia Hendy, who were both in jail, changed their minds and refused to cooperate. Yancey had received a note that said rats die in jail. Hendy also received mail, but they were love letters. They were pretty much appealing to Cindy, saying, "I love you, I want to marry you," explained Glatt. Ray even had a tattoo of Cindy put on his arm. Still having deep feelings for Ray, Hendy recanted her confession and said she'd made it all up. For some reason, the judge postponed the trial further in order to try Ray for a 1996 murder in Colorado, even though the evidence wasn't very strong. A sheet found by the FBI when searching his trailer, listing routines for keeping prisoners, was excluded along with the torture devices in the toy box, since it couldn't be proven that they were in Ray's possession in 1996. On May 23rd, the jury selection for Ray's new trial was finally done, and he was charged with 12 counts of kidnapping, sexual abuse, and conspiracy. In July, the judge declared a mistrial because the jury couldn't agree on a verdict. Not all of them were persuaded that the testifying victims had been held against their will. Ray's defense was that the sex trailer was part of Ray's fantasy life and any sex was consensual. In November 2000, a retrial began. A few days into it, the judge passed away. The proceedings couldn't resume until next year, in April 2001. This time, Ray was not as fortunate and was found guilty on all 12 charges. The new judge assigned to the trial also allowed Ray's introductory tape recording, so the jury got to hear it. Yeah, I bet that made a great difference. Clearly it did. In June 2001, his second trial against Cynthia Vigil began. A week into his trial for crimes against Vigil, Ray agreed to a plea bargain. The plea deal was in exchange of leniency for his daughter. Prosecutors said that the surviving victims had approved of the deal. Ray's daughter, Glenda Jean Jessie Ray, pled guilty to kidnapping. Dennis Roy Yancey, 27, pled guilty to the 1997 murder of 22-year-old Marie Parker in Elephant Butte. Yancey confessed to helping Jessie Ray lure Parker into captivity in her father's trailer. Yancey said that Parker was tortured and that Ray forced him to strangle the woman to death. Parker's body was never found, and prosecutors said that no forensic evidence was found to tie Parker to the Rays. The murder was recorded by Ray on video. Yancey was also charged with kidnapping, 2 counts of conspiracy to commit a crime, and tampering with evidence. Hendy testified against David Parker's crime and pleaded guilty, thus reducing her sentence. Ray has allegedly admitted to having had an accomplice named Billy Bowers, a previous business partner whom Ray also murdered. On May 28, 2002, Ray was transported to the Lee County Correctional Facility in Hobbs, New Mexico, to be questioned by state police. He died of a heart attack before the scheduled interrogation took place. He was 62. With him dead, the case became a dead end. No bodies were found, no possible victims were identified, and no old suspicious deaths related to Ray were ever officially linked to him. In November of 2002, the toy box was opened to the public with the hope that it would lead to more surviving victims coming forward. In October of 2011, the FBI performed a search of McRae Canyon near Elephant Butte Lake, looking for potential victims, but found none. In February of 2012, the Australian Federal Police contacted the FBI about a potential victim known only as Connie, who had been mentioned in a letter from a man named Mark that was postmarked in Sydney and was found in Ray's residence after his arrest. Hendy was sentenced in 2000 for her roles in the abduction and torture of Cynthia Vigil and Angelica Montano, and received a sentence of 36 years in prison. With his daughter Jessie Ray about to stand trial for helping her father kidnap Kelly Garrett, Ray offered to plead guilty to all of the remaining charges in exchange for his daughter's release. Ray was sentenced in 2001 to 224 years in connection with kidnapping and other charges involving 2 women who said he sexually tortured them at his residence. Although Ray had never admitted to murder, he contacted authorities in May of 2002 to let them know he was willing to talk. Ray claimed to have abducted about 40 victims, according to the FBI. A meeting was quickly scheduled, but David Parker Ray died of a heart attack before it took place. Ray's daughter was sentenced to time served with an additional 5 years to be served on probation. Though Roy Yancey refused to testify, he pled guilty to and was convicted of second-degree murder and conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. In 1999, he was sentenced to 2 15-year terms in prison. The Rays were never charged with Marie Parker's murder. Aside from the possibility of Ray's previous girlfriends being accomplices throughout the years, the 4 known accomplices were Cynthia Hendy, his current girlfriend, Dennis Roy Yancey, an acquaintance of Roy's, his daughter Glenda Jean Ray, also known as Jessie Ray, and, according to Ray, a previous business partner, Billy Bowers, who Ray had allegedly killed. Being eligible for parole after serving half her sentence, Hendy was released in 2019, so 3 years ago. She was scheduled to receive parole in 2017. She was released on July 15th, 2019, after serving the 2 years of her parole in prison. It is not clear where Hendy now lives. On release, she did move to Hamilton, Montana. However, the Hamilton community members expressed frustration and worry on social media about having Hendy live close to a local school, and according to one Reddit post, she may have moved back to Washington State. In 2010, Yancey was paroled after serving 11 years in prison, out of 30. But the release was delayed by difficulties in negotiating a plan for residence. 3 months after his release in 2011, Yancey was charged with violating his parole. He was remanded in custody, where he remained until 2021, serving the rest of his original sentence. He is now paroled. Ray's daughter, Jessie, had only served 2.5 years and has been a free woman since 2002. As such, the Toy Box Killer's accomplices all now walk amongst us. These are the people who willingly assisted a cruel, sadomasochistic serial rapist who more than likely was a serial killer. It was just never proven. These people are all walking freely. In 2011, the FBI released hundreds of images of items that were collected during the investigation, including jewelry and women's clothing. We are asking family and friends of missing people to look over these photographs and contact us if they recognize any of these items.
I'm still pissed off at him. I curse him most of the time.
Mainly for what?
Putting me in this situation with his stupid fantasies. I didn't hate Cindy. I just didn't know her.
And you were not horrified?
No, nothing drastic was happening. There was no blood, or she wasn't being beat to a pulp or anything, you know. So what's there to be horrified over?
I get my excitement from making a woman happy. I got pleasure out of the woman getting pleasure. I did what they wanted me to do. My trailer had numerous sex toys in it of different types, all different fetishes.
I believe there are bodies here. It remains to be seen whether they're in the lake itself or whether they're in the desert somewhere. But I personally find it impossible to believe that somebody that had developed this behavior to such an extent, he would not be killing people. This is such a vast, rural, and remote area, and this body of water is so large and difficult to search. It's just too convenient a disposal site for bodies for them not to be there.